We're going to continue with our introduction to Kodshim. And if you're following, we're on page Yud Ches, halfway down the right column. We're discussing the case of Zrika Shalobim Koma. And we had two opinions about a Zrika Shalobim Koma. And as we move forward, we'll get into these two opinions and what the scenarios are. What exactly was Shalobim Koma? Where did he mess up in terms of the Makom HaZrika? According to one man Diomar, Zrika Shalobim Koma is Kimikoma Dami, which means that the Bailam have Kapara, although the Zrika was in the wrong place, they do not have to bring a replacement korban. As far as the Emurim is concerned, everybody agrees, even if I hold Kimikoma Dami, the Emurim are possible, and there won't be any Haktarah Emurim. The Bailam will achieve Kapara without Haktarah Emurim. Then the other man, the Yomer, says, Kishalo Bimkoma Dami. And that means that the korban is possible, and the Bailam will be required to bring a replacement korban. Now, according to the man Diomar who holds Kimikoma Dami, we had another machlokes as far as the status of the dam itself. And that is that if I hold, no, I'm sorry, did I say Kimikoma Dami? I meant to say, if I hold Lav Kimikoma Dami, is there a possibility of salvaging the korban? Because if I hold Lav Kimikoma Dami, it means the Bailam will have to bring a replacement korban. But the question is whether there's a psul in the dam itself. We'll call it the Gufo Shel Dam. And those two opinions, according to the man Diomar who says Lav Kimikoma Dami, so if you follow the flow chart, are Yasfenu or Lo Yasfenu. If I hold Lo Yasfenu means you cannot collect the dam that's on the Mizbeach and do a repeat performance of the Zrika in the right place. That's called Lo Yasfenu. But Yasfenu means that you can collect the dam from the Mizbeach, put it back into the Mizrach, into the Kos, and do a second Zrika to replace the first Zrika. That's called Yasfenu. Even if I hold Lo Yasfenu, and we're holding now Lav Kimikoma Dami, so the Bailim are in real trouble now. They'll have to bring a replacement korban. There is a way of salvaging, even if I hold Lo Yasfenu, and that would be if there's Shirayim in the Kos that was not subject to Zrika, or alternatively, if let's say you can collect down Minat Savor from the Behemoth itself. Now, if you hold Lo Yasfenu, that means the dam on the Mizbeach is completely out. That's a psul in the dam because the Zrika was Shalobim Koma. So that's Fafal and that's goodbye Charlie, as we say. However, as far as the Bailam is concerned, there's a possibility theoretically for the Kohen to do a repeat Zrika for this korban in the right place. Let him get it right this time. If there is dam that didn't reach the Mizbeach. But what does that mean? Either it means that Shirayim in the Kos, or it means that there's still dam in the Tzavra Behema, which he can have a new Kabbalah on that dam. If on the other hand I hold Shalobim Koma Kibikoma Dami, then as we said before, then and again we mentioned that that's a derivation from a pasuk that says Ala Mizbeach Lechaper, meaning the whole Mizbeach is one entity. Kevan Shegi Adam. But even if I hold this kapra bailim, because kimikoma dami, nevertheless the basar emurim is possible. So that's what we said yesterday. Now today we're going to introduce another machlokas tanoim, and in order to move forward today, we have to re-emphasize one point that we made yesterday, which was called Klitas HaMizbeach, that if you hold Lav Kimikoma Dami, it means that the Mizbeach was kolate the dam, And that's why Lav Kim Komatami means that the dam became possible and the Bailim lost the kapar of the carbon, because the Mizbeach grabs onto that dam Shalobim Komo, which means that it invalidates the Zrika of the dam. And we pointed out that there's a little bit of a paradox here in applying this principle of HaMizbeach Kolate, because what do you mean? There's a shita that holds that all psulim im olu lo yerdu. Again, we're going to have a whole long discussion about that. We're not ready for that yet. But basically that means that if the Mizbeach was kolate, then it should be makadesh the dam, even if the dam itself is possible, because im olu lo yerdu. Now, Rabbi Gamliel is the one who holds im olu lo yerdu. So then, if we say that kol to mizbeach, and that's why lav kimakomo domi, and therefore the bayim lo is kapru, that explanation of klitas hamizbeach is going to be very problematic for Rabbi Gamliel. Basically, there's no way of reconciling the concept of klitas hamizbeach, which means that lav kimakomo domi and the bayim lose and forfeit their kapara, with Rabbi Gamliel who holds that im olu lo yerdu. And therefore, we're going to have to assume that klitas hamizbeach operates in a totally different way. And it means that once the mizbeach was kolate, it's not that the mizbeach is makadesh the dam that's possible, because then we have this principle of Rabbi Gamliel im olu lo yerdu, but it's a different kind of halacha. Operates with its own, it beats to its own drum. And that's called klitas hamizbeach. Now, we said that if we hold lav kimakomo dami, then we have a machlokes about yasfenu or lo yasfenu. Here we have a machlokes amoroim. And in order to appreciate this machlokes amoroim, we're going to have to take the case of Shalobim Komo and further break it down into its component parts. There could be what I call the most radical Shalobim Komo, and then this could be a less radical Shalobim Komo. The most radical Shalobim Komo would be when it didn't get to the right Mizbeach. Let's say, for example, in a Chatas Pnimis, you'll need Zrika on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, and instead he did the Zrika on the Mizbeach HaChitzoni. Or vice versa, if he took, let's say a Karban Ola Shlomim, Asham Shlomim, and instead of doing a Zrika on the Kira Mizbeach, or on, in certain cases, let's say Chatas Chitzona on the Karanos Mizbeach, instead he did a Zrika on the Mizbeach HaPnimi inside the Heichal, that is the most radical Shalobim Komo. It's not even on the Mizbeach as far as this carbon is concerned. We can have a less radical kind of a Shalobim Koma in a case where he was meant to be Zorek Lamata on the lower half of the Mizbeach below the Churesika, and instead he did a Zrika on Lamala, or vice versa. So now we have a Machlokes Amoroi. According to one Shita, if the dam that was meant to be Lamala was Lamata, vice versa, then we have a Machlokes whether you can collect that dam, according to Madi Omer Lav Kimakomatami, and do a second repeat Zrika. But on the other hand, if you had a more radical Shalobim Koma, it means it didn't even reach the Mizbeach, not the right Mizbeach in any event, then everybody would agree, according to this Shita in Amoroim, that Yasfenu, collect it and start again. Meaning that principle called Mizbeach Kolate and so forth and so on that's not relevant unless it was the right Mizbeach. If it's right Mizbeach, but instead of the top half, it was on the bottom half, or vice versa, then you could talk about being the Mizbeach was kolate the dam, and that generates a psul in the dam, such that lo yasfenu, he can't do another repeat zrika. Other Rishonim say that, just one second, where's the other sheet of the Rishonim? Or kuli modim shloisah nikum sha'al kol panim nosan hamatonim izmeach haroyla. That shelo yasfena only applies, according to these Rishonim, when it reached the right mizbeach. Then lo yasfena, because it was a meaningful zrika in the sense that the mizbeach was kolate. It was the right mizbeach. The mizbeach has the power, so to speak, to be kolate the dam that belongs on that mizbeach, like has an ownership possession rights on that dam. But if it's on the wrong mizbeach, that mizbeach has no rights to the dam. It's not kolate the dam, and then everybody would agree, asfena, you could do a repeat zrika. So let's go on now, and we'll break down the different possibilities of shalobim koma, and he was zorik the dam shalobim koma. It was meant to be lamala, right, the top half of the mizbeach, and he did it in the bottom half of the mizbeach, or it was meant to be labata, and he did the nesiyan sadam lamala. Or, for example, you can have, this has to do, I think, with Bechor and Maser, but in any event, you can have a zrika that has to be on, let's say, the Mizrachis Dromis Keneged HaYisod, and instead he did his zrika Shalom Keneged HaYisod, right? The Yisod didn't surround the entire Mizbeach on all four sides. All that is considered zrika Shalom Koma. And if he did this Rika on the Mizbeach, it was the right Mizbeach, but the wrong location on the Mizbeach, then we have machlokas of is Kimkoma Domi or Lav Kimkoma Domi. But Matano Shenitan al Mizbeach HaPnimi v'Noslan al Mizbeach HaChitzon, according to some Rishonim, no one would say Kimkoma Domi. And from one perspective, that's bad news, but from another perspective, that's very good news. It's bad news because status quo, the Bailam are going to have to repeat the Avos HaKarban. There's no kapara on a Karban Shalom Koma if it's on the wrong Mizbeach, and everybody would agree that that's Lav Kim Koma Domi. So even if I hold Kim Koma Domi, that's only, according to the sheet that we showed, that's only in the same Mizbeach, but Lamata, Lamata. But if it's on the wrong Mizbeach, the Pnimi versus the Chitzoni, then everybody agrees that Lav Kimkom and the Bailim forfeit their kapara. But the good news is that there's no Klitas Mizbeach, which means that everybody would agree that Yasfenu, that the dam which is now on the wrong Mizbeach can be collected and you could redo the Zrika on the right Mizbeach. So that's good news in terms of salvaging. But in the case of Nitan al Mizbeach HaChitzon, V'nostam al Mizbeach HaPnimi, according to that school of Rishonim, then the dam is possible for a whole nother reason. Meaning, we're going to say that everybody agrees in the case of Pnimi versus Chitzoni that Lav Kimakom Domi, the Bailam will forfeit their kapara. But there's a reason why, in one of those two scenarios, in one direction, the dam is possible. And the direction we're talking about is where it was meant to be on the Mizbach HaNechoshes, and instead he did the Zrika inside the Heichal of the Mizbech HaPnimi. And in that case, according to these Rishonim, the dam is possible. And that has to do with a different category of psul, which we never discussed, and that's dama nichnas laheichal. No, it's normally when we talk about a psul dam of chutzlim komo, it meant you lowered it one darga, and you took the dam out of the azora. And we discussed that in the past. Such a dam is possible because it's not roy lizrika. But now we're talking about an upgrade. Instead of sprinkling the dam on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, he upgraded. He went into the Heichal and he did the Zrika in the Mizbeach HaPnimi. There also there's a kind of a Chutzlam Komo, Yotza Chutzlam Kom Psul Yotze. And that also will generate a Psul in the dam, even though there was no Zrika, meaning any Zrika on the Mizbeach HaPnimi with regard to these karbanos that require Zrika on the Mizbeach HaChitzon is not Zrika at all. It doesn't even register. And as we said, he could collect the dam and rectify his mistake. But nay, according to these Rishonim, he can't do so. Why? If instead of doing the Zrika on the Pnimi, he did the Zrika on the Chitzoni, everybody agrees, Lav Kimakomo Dami, and the carbon is in the balance, so to speak, the Kaparsa carbon. Of course, the question is, can he now redo the Zrika? He meant to do the Zrika on the inside, and the Pnimi, he did it on the outside, the Chisoni. And we're going to argue in favor of redoing the Zrika Yasfenu, according to that Mandion. However, there's one case in which everybody agrees the dam in itself is possible, according to, again, this sheet in the Rishonim, and that's the case where he was meant to be Zorik on the Chitzoni, and instead he was Zorik on the Pnimi. That's called Dama Nichnas Lahechal, and that's a Psul. So Yasfenu is not going to be an option. Fine. There's a very strange Rambam in Hilchas Psuli HaMukdashim that seems to undermine everything that we've said. The Rambam says that even in the case where he was meant to be Zorik the Dam on the Chitzoni, and instead of doing so, he was Zorik on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the Rambam says in that case, everybody agrees that that's Kim Komo Dam, that the Bailim will achieve Kapara. Again, forget about the Emurim, that's a different story. So how do we make sense out of this Rambam? We said on the contrary. In this case, everybody agrees that it's Lav Kim Komo. He did Zrika on the wrong Mizbeach. And not only that, the Dam itself becomes inherently possible, which means that blocks the opportunity for Asifa doing a repeat Zrika. Why? Because of Psul of Yotze. It's not called Yotze, it's called Dama Nichlas Lahecha. I'm going to tell you what the Achronim say to defend the Rambam in just a minute. I just want to tell you what I would have said to defend the Rambam. That the Rambam holds a kind of Yesh B'chlal Masayim Mana, which means that the Mizbeach HaPnimi is on a higher level than the Mizbeach HaChitzoni, and any dam that is mechaper on the Mizbeach HaChitzoni ipso facto is mechaper on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Again, he shouldn't have done so, and he forfeits the mitzvah of Karnim in terms of Zrika, but the Zrika is absolutely valid, and even if I hold Shalom B'Komo is Lav Kimakomo Tami, and the entire, the entire venture of this carbon is now up in the air as to whether it could be Mechap or not. And if all things are equal, it won't be Mechap because I'm holding Lav Kimakomo Tami, but here it's Kimakomo Tami. Why? Because the Zrika was done on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. But let's see what the Achronim say. He quotes here the Chafetz Chaim and the Mikdash David. I have to tell you that these are the two, almost the Balabatim on Kodshim. Is the Chafetz Chaim is Likutei Halachos, which I have somewhere, I don't know where, and the Mikdash David. The Mikdash David in Kodshim and Paris is like, it's almost like Reb Chaim on the Rambam. And they say the following. Din ze shayach biofanim bohem domim chitzonim shenichtus lehechol enam nifsol. That the Rambam holds that under certain circumstances there's no psul in the dam of nichnas lehechol. And under those circumstances, where there is no psul in the dam, then the Rambam holds that we could say it's kimakomo domi. And why is it kimakomo domi, even though it's not makomo? Because of the upgrade of mizbeach hapnimi. But again, you have to stipulate the condition that there is no psul of dam shenichnas lehechal. What would be the case where there's no psul of dam shenichnas lehechal? Egon behichnis derech mishupash v'lo derech shar hechal. In other words, when does knisa of dam chitzoni into the hechal passel the dam? That's only mitzad the knisa itself. It's not the himotzus. It's not the fact that the dam is inside the hechal, but it's because you brought it into the hechal. And halacha defines bringing it into the hechal as derech shar hahechal. In a case where instead of going derech shar hahechal, he found a way of breaching the choma that surrounds the hechal. So there was he bores a hole, I don't know how, underneath the kosel that surrounds the hechal, and he doesn't enter into the shar hahechal. Or there's another possible way he could do that, and that's according to one shita that there's no psul nichnas lepnim b'shar karbonos chutz michatas. So again, I'm just going to explain this balabatish. Obviously, it's much more profound than this. That in a case of a chatos, since chatos divides up into two subcategories, there's a chatos pnimis and chatos chitzona. There, the Torah says that nichnas lepnimis is possible. Why? Because he changed the whole nature of the chatos. But in the cases of all other karbonos, of ola, asham, and shlamim, where there is no such thing as pnimis, then we're not afraid that you've made us confuse, you confuse the different subcategories of that carbon, and therefore pnimis is an upgrade, and it doesn't pass the dam. And if we go with that explanation, then what it means is if he takes the dam of, let's say, a carbon ola, and instead of zrika al gabi mizbeach hachitzon, he does the zrika mizbeach hapnimi, everybody's going to agree that the ola is not kosher, unless he does asifa. How can he do asifa? After all, the dam was nichnas lahechal. So according to the second man, the Omar, dam and nichnas lahechal doesn't passel in shar kodshim, it only passels in chatas. Hence, in the case of an ola, the fact that the zrika was done inside on the mizbeach hapnimi doesn't passel the carbon in terms of the dam itself. And the Rambam took this one step further, and he says it's not even considered shalom b'mkomo. So that even if I hold shalom b'mkomo lav kimakomo dami, in this case it's called makomo because the mizbeach hapnimi is the supreme mizbeach. Okay, this is where we're going to stop for today. And Emir Hashem will continue a little bit more on Shalom B'mkomo tomorrow, and then we want to get to the Psul Lina and the Psul Notzar, which is a fundamental breakthrough, so to speak, in the laws of Psule Mizbeh. We're on Daf Samach in Perek Tamid Nishchat, and we're up to Toshma. So to put your finger on the place, we're going to count up from the bottom of Daf Samach Amid Aleph, approximately 12 lines up from the bottom. The first word in the line is Lishmo. And we're back to the suffix of Rav Papa. Let's just reiterate the suffix of Rav Papa. Rav Papa didn't know whether our Mishnah was talking about shtei avodos or avoda achas. If it's avoda achas, then the Mishnah can only be reconciled with Rabbi Yossi Shita, who says af b'gemar dvarav adam nitfas, so that the second machshava in that avoda registers, even though it contradicts the first machshava that he had. But we cannot then reconcile our Mishnah with the Shita of Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir has a principle called Tfos Lashon Rishon, which would mean that if he started, for example, with Machshavas Lishmo in the Korban Pesach, and then he changed his mind Toch Kedei Avoda during the Shechita, and he had in mind L'Shem Shlomim, which is Shalol Lishma, then the Korban would have to be kosher, according to Rabbi Meir, because Tfos Lashon Rishon. Or, says Rav Papa, perhaps the Mishnah is talking about shtei avodas, in which case the machshava of each avodah is a separate, independent unit. And if he had a machshava lishma in shchita, but he had a machshava shalol lishma l'shem shlomim in Kabbalah or in halacha or in zrika, then the korban is possible. And we can justify this Mishnah of a machshava of lishmo that was followed by a machshava shalol lishmo, meaning l'shem pesach, and then afterwards l'shem shlomim, and the korban is possible, even according to Rabbi Meir. And even though Tfos Lashon Rishon in general applies, like in the case of Tvura that we said, Arezu Tvurut's Ola, Arezu Tvurut Shlomim, not in this case of Shtei Avodos. And whether or not our Mishnah is Be'avoda Achas or B'Shtei Avodos, that's the point in which Rav Papa vacillated back and forth. And again, the difference is going to be whether our Mishnah is paskin is accepting Rabbi Yossi, and that's called avoda achas, or our Mishnah is very open-minded, can accept Rabbi Meir, and the reason for that is because we're talking about shtei avodas. Toshma. The Gemara is now going back to our Mishnah, and we're going to analyze our Mishnah carefully, meticulously. Now, keep in mind that this Mishnah that we learned is really the Reisha of a longer Mishnah. The Seif of this Mishnah is printed later on Daf Samach Aleph. And the Toshma is going to operate with the following methodological premise: that when you have a Reisha and a Seifa of one Mishnah, if you can prove from the Reisha or from the Seifa, al ma medubar, what is the exact scenario, then we assume the integrity of the Mishnah, and if the Seifa is X, then the Reisha is also X. And if there's an ambiguity, once we can clarify, in our case, the Seifa, which is the Mishnah that's printed on Daf Samach Aleph, then we have a clarification of the Reisha as well. So what does the Mishnah say in the Sefer? Shechato shaloli ochlav, or alternatively, v'shalol limenuyav. Another option is la relim. Another option is litmeim. So he's got 4 different categories here. And what's common, the common denominator to all 4 is that they're ena re'uyim lachilas ha-pesach. Now, in the first case, it's ena ro'y lachilas ha-pesach on a physical level. In the Metzius, you're talking about a chole or a zaken. Now, you may ask, well, a zaken could still eat to the korban pesach. A chole mela, maybe he's he's never hospitalized and they're feeding him intravenously, he can't eat the korban pesach. But what about a zaken? So a zaken, we say he cannot eat a kezayis. He can only eat small portions, at infrequent intervals. So that's called, in the first of the 4 cases enumerated in our Mishnah, shaloli ochla. These are individuals who cannot eat the korban pesach. We should not expect the Kohen to have in mind when he does the avoda of the Pesach, those people who are incapable of achila, like a zokin or a chola. That's not a good idea. You know, we do many things on behalf of cholim and zkenim, but this is not one of them. To shech the Korban Pesach on behalf of chola zokin, that's a no-no, because the chola zokin is ein roy lachila. And herein lies the distinction between Pesach and all other korbanos. Pesach has a unique connection, unbreakable connection to achila. We don't find in any other korban that it would make a bit of a difference whether the bala korban is a chola, whether he's a zaken, whether he's capable of achila or not. But in Korban Pesach, the achlus abasa b'layla zeh. The whole goal is to facilitate the achilas ha-Pesach. Then the Mishnah lists 3 cases or categories of individuals who also can be classified as shalom liochel, but not on a physical level, but rather on a legal level. The Torah itself prohibits them from eating the Korban Pesach. Now, if we fast forward to the last 2 categories, skipping the second category, then once again, we're talking about a general rule in Kodshim, in Karbonos. And there are 2 categories of people who are prohibited from eating from all Kodshim, and that would be Tmeim and Areli. However, there's a unique category of Shalom Le'ochel, which is again a halachic category that applies to a healthy person, and it's halachically excludes a Shalom Nuya, somebody who wasn't part of the Minui on the Korban Pesach. And the Mishnah on Daf Samach Aleph is going to establish that if he had in mind the Kohen, any one of those 4 categories, then the Korban is possible. And that is a unique halacha in Korban Pesach because it's l'shem bailav, but it's l'shem bailim she'ena ru'uyim la'achilas ha'Korban Pesach. And that itself is a psul. Now, we're going to try to analyze that Mishnah. The Mishnah used the word shchato shaloli ochla. Are we talking about all the avodos, or are we talking about one particular avodah? Hacha says Gemara Pshita, there's no question about it, that we're talking about avoda achas. Why? Because he had only one machshava. This is not like the Reisha, meaning our Mishnah, where we were talking about a case of shalo lishma, meaning l'shem shlomim, and we had a combination of lishma and shalo lishma. That could be either 2 different avodos or within the same avodah. But in the case of shaloli ochlav, we're not talking about 2 machshavos. He had one machshava, shaloli ochlav. Our Mishnah, meaning the Reisha, he's talking about lishma and shalol lishma. So he had kavana l'shem Pesach, he had kavana l'shem shlomim, and then you could talk about 2 avodos. One avodah he did with l'shem Pesach, the other l'shem shlomim. That makes sense. But not in this case of the seif of the Mishnah of shalolim nuyav, etc., shaloli ochlav, because he only had one machshava. And if he only had one machshava, then perhaps, so since he had only one machshava, we're talking about one avodah. Again, the issue of shtei avodas only comes to the fore in a case of 2 machshavas. But here we're talking about a case of one machshava. And if it's one machshava, then it's one avodah. So he does the shchita shalolim nuyav, shalol liochlav. And we don't have to introduce the other avodos of Zrika, etc., because there was no other machshava. The whole issue in the Mishnah, as I said before, of which machshava do we emphasize and validate, whether it's the lishma or shelo lishma, that's only relevant when you have a stira, you have a contradiction in his machshava. He had both lishma and shelo lishma, so you could say that was in two different avodos. But in the case of shelo l'nuyav, clearly that has to be in one avodah, because there's no machshava soseres, there's no contradicting or conflicting machshava. He only had one machshava of shelo li'ochla. Says the Gemara, "Umid is sefer b'avoda achas, reisha nami b'avoda achas." We're going to apply the yardstick, the methodology of reisha and sefer. I did Tani reisha, Tani sefer, I did Tani sefer, Tani reisha. And since the sefer clearly, beyond the shadow of a doubt, is talking about avoda achas, because there's only one machshava. If there's only one machshava, there's no contradiction, and we don't have to introduce two different avodas. Is Reisha Nami Avoda Achas. We go back to the Reisha, that's our Mishnah that we're studying today, and we prove that Mishnah is also referring to Avoda Achas. Our Mishnah says Lishmo v'Shalo Lishmo Pasul. And it's also Bavoda Achas. In other words, even though the first Mishnah, meaning the Reisha of the Mishnah, could theoretically be interpreted as Shtei Avodos, because he has two machshavos, hasosros, zu es zu. But nevertheless, we're going to assume that it's one machshav, which means that we're going to exclude Rabbi Meir. And now we're going to be machriya Rav Papa's Safek. Our Mishnah of Lishma and Shelo Lishma is a case of one avoda, and in the case of Lishma and Shelo Lishma, Rabbi Meir would not accept that Mishnah. He would not disqualify the Korban Pesach, because once he had the machshava of Lishma, post Lashon Rishon, and therefore the fact that he changed his mind at the end of this avoda, again withholding now avoda achas, that's not relevant, because post Lashon Rishon. So the Gemara now says Midi Iria. And that language of Midi Iria is also a methodology. And you never know when the Gemara is going to tell you that Mida Sefer Reisha, Nami, and when the Gemara is going to tell you that Mida Iria. And I'm not impressed by this logic. And I'm willing to split the Reisha from the Sefer. Hakidisa v'Hakidisa. Enochinami, the second Mishnah, which we call the Sefer, is referring to Avoda Achas. But our Mishnah of Lishma and Shelo Lishma is talking about two Avodos. Sefer b'Avoda Achas, Reisha, I b'Avoda Achas, I b'Shtei Avodos, meaning that Rav Papa is going to vacillate, and the Reisha lends itself to two interpretations. And we're not sure if he had the machshava of these two machshavas as sotros, whether or not it was within the same avoda and we knock off Rabbi Meir from the equation, or it was two avodos and we reinvite Rabbi Meir to the table. Okay, so now the Gemara rejects this raya, and we had a raya yesterday at the beginning of Daf Samach from the opening line in the Mishnah. Now the Gemara wants to be poshet the suffix from the next part of the Mishnah. And once again, the Gemara is going to base itself on the Sefer. What happened in the Sefer? It says, Li ochlav v'shalo li ochlav. Let's say he had a double machshava. Sorry. Now again, we're talking about machshavos hasosros zuzu. And again, it could go in either direction. Either he started with the right machshava on the right foot, and he had the machshava l'shem ochlav, and then he changed his mind and he had machshava shaloli ochlav, or the other way around. And the Mishnah surprises us by telling us kosher, that the carbon is kosher. Now, the Gemara is going to try to prove that this Mishnah is talking about avoda achas. And the Gemara is going to exclude the possibility of interpreting this Mishnah as referring to shtei avodos. Why? Hechidom. I name of shtei avodos. Then the carbon should be possible. Why? Because the carbon is being brought for the sake of the menuyim exclusively. And they need 4 avodas. Now, once there was an avoda, it doesn't matter which avoda it was, any of the 4, that was shalolim nuyav, then there was never that avoda, whichever it was, for the menuyim. And in effect, you're talking about reducing, the hakrava from 4 avodos to 3 avodos. Well, 3 avodos is not going to do it for you. It's 4 or bust. So memela, if we're talking about a machshava somewhere at some point of shalol le'ochlav, then we must be talking about within the avod itself. Within the avod itself, he started, let's say, the shchita with l'shem. Let's say there are 2 simanim in shchita. So he shechted the first siman l'shem ochlav, and then when he got to the second siman, he had in mind shaloli ochlav. Okay, but the avoda got off on the right start, and there was an avoda l'shem ochlav, albeit in his first machshava. And that's why the carbon could be kosher, because the chal shem avoda of shchita is related to the ochlav. Masha Enkein, if one of the 4 avodos, let's take shchita, was shaloli ochlav, then there's no way, no how that the Mishnah could have been machshir this carbon, because the avoda was, one of the avodos, in this case shchita, was shaloli ochlav. So the Gemara says, "I name of shtei avodos." If the Mishnah is talking about where he had these 2 contradictory machshavos during 2 separate avodos, let's say he shechted it for those who could eat the Korban Pesach, and the zrika was for the sake of those who could not eat the Korban Pesach, then in such a case, what would be the logic that we could be machshir the carbon? Taima is the chashiv bizrika. In other words, he has a machshava during the zrika of shaloli ochla. And what are you going to tell me? The ein machsheves ochlin bizrika. Now the Gemara introduces a new principle, that there are 2 achilos. There's achilas adam and there's achilas mizbeach. Shchita, in the case of a Korban Pesach, is clearly aimed at achilas adam. But zrika already divides into 2 dimensions. On the one hand, the zrika is necessary for the hechsher carbon, such that the bailim could eventually eat the basar. But on the other hand, the zrika is for the achilas mizbeach. And the nafkamina is if the kohen has a machshava at the time of the zrika, or maybe even at the time of the shchita before the zrika, of the enam ru'uyim lachila shalom liochla, is that a relevant machshava to Zrika. If I emphasize exclusively the Achilas Mizbeach element of Zrika, then the Zrika has nothing to do with the Achilas Adam, at least as an Avoda. It may be a Tnai in the Hechshar Carbon, but it's not an Avoda that's directed or implemented for the purpose of Achilas Ha'adam. And therefore the whole entity of Shelo Li'ochlav is irrelevant to Zrika. And that's what the Gemara coins this principle called Ein Machsheves Ochlim B'Zrika. Let me give you an example. Let's say during one of the avodos, the Kohen thinks about I don't know which is your favorite team, the Yankees, the Mets. I'm in New York. So. He thinks about the Yankees winning the World Series, Halavai, right? So that's not a machshava poselis. What does that have? It's min cheno mino. It doesn't even register. Shaloli ochlav in Zrika is like thinking about the baseball game. It's totally irrelevant. It doesn't undermine the Zrika because there's no machshavas ochlav in Zrika. Zrika is not an avoda that's geared for the purpose of achila. So the Gemara says, Taima, the reason why the carbon is not possible is the Kodshim Bizrika. When did he have the machshav of Shaloli Ochlav? It was during the Zrika. So now we're holding Shtei Avodos. It's therefore the carbon is kosher. The A machshav is Ochlin Bizrika. There's no such thing as a machshava poseles of Shaloli Ochlav during Zrika. The implication is that be'avoda achas, if let's say during the shchita, for example, he had a machshava of shaloli ochlav, the mahanya be machshavas ochlin possible. It's a little paradoxical. He says the mahanya le machshavas sounds like it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing. Why? Because the shchita has to be l'shem ochlav. And he had a machshava shalol l'shem ochlav. That's going to passel the carbon. Now, wait a second. Now you're talking about avoda achas, and then the Mishnah says li ochla v'shalol li ochla, which means that during the course of that one single avoda of shchita, he had in mind Yaakov, who could eat from the carbon pesach, and Beryl, who cannot eat from the carbon pesach. So the Gemara says, "Kaimalon mixas ochlin lo posla." In other words, there's no positive psul of shaloli ochla. Shaloli ochla is possible because he didn't have a machshava liochla. But in this case of avoda achas of liochlav and shaloli ochlav, he did in fact have a machshava of liochlav. He also had a machshava for Beryl, and Beryl is not capable of eating from the carbon pesach. That per se does not undermine the kashrus of the carbon pesach, because we paskin that miktas ochlin lo pasla. As long as you have in mind those who could eat from the carbon pesach, that itself is an absolute machshir of the carbon pesach. So if the Mishnah is talking about avoda achas, then how could the Mishnah postulate that in li ochlav and shaloli ochlav in avoda achas the carbon is possible? That's absolutely false. Because if we're talking about one avoda, then the principle is miktas ochlin lo posla. I just read to you his translation. He says, "Carbon pesach senimnu ol kama noshim shemiktasam yicholim lechol pesach kizayis min pesach miktasam einam yicholim lechol kizayis v'nishchad hakarbon l'shem kol hamenuyim." He had in mind anyone who's manui, and including those who are manui was chol or zaken. Harezu shchita kshera. The ein omrim shechatzi hashchita haisa l'reuyim l'karbon The chetzio l'she'enam ruyim lo. Kevan she'afli osam ha'reuyim levadam tzarich lishchot es shnei hasimonim is lo moyil lahem chatzi shchita. Now, he's talking about a slightly different scenario than the one I mentioned to you. He's talking about a case which I'm not sure how this operates. We'll have to get more into Perik Tov and Nishchat to appreciate this, but that even those who are Einam Ru'uyim Lachila were part of the minu. But again, that's a technicality. I don't think we have to get sidetracked. But the point is that the Machshavas HaKohen, at the time the Shechita was for all menuyim, which by definition includes even the Einam Ru'uyim, like a Chol or a Zaken. They were also part of the minu. Or alternatively, he might be talking about a case where the we'll call him Yankel Beryl was tar at the time of the minui, and then he was contaminated with tuma before the actual akrav of the carbon. So now he's manui. There's no reason to undermine his minui, but he's shaloli ochlav. He cannot eat from the carbon pesach. So he says that in such a case where the Kohen had in mind all the minuyim, including even those who are Einam Ochlim, Harezu Shchita Kshera. The Ein Omrim Shechatzi Shchita Isa L'Reuyim L'Karban. V'Chetzia L'She'enam Reuyim Lo. In other words, as we said before, Shchita requires two simanim. We're not going to say that one siman he shechted on behalf of the Reuyim Lachila, and the other on behalf of the Einam Reuyim Lachila. That doesn't make any sense because the Reuyim Lachila need a shechita on both simanim. And if he had in mind the Minuyim, then he had in mind those who are Roi Lachila for both simanim. Is therefore Rezu Shchita Kshera, Kevan Sha'afla Osam Reuyim Levadam Tzarich Lishchot Et Shnei Simanim. Velomo ilo lahem chatzi shchita. You can't shecht one simon and call it a shchita for anybody. The imkain bevadai af im hashchita levada. Pashiv kishochet liochlav v'shalo liochlav. Hakarman kosher. In other words, even if you'll tell me that we're talking about one avoda, and the shochet had in mind, the Kohen HaShochet had in mind all the menuyim, including those of Shalom Liochlav, then for sure the carbon is kosher. There's no doubt about it because he has in mind even the Liochlav. And you can't split the two simanim because even the Liochlav need both simanim. Is therefore, by process of elimination, we're going to have to assume that if this mission is telling me something that I don't know, it's talking about two avodos. That he had one avodo l'shema ochlav, and another avodo he had in mind machshavet shalo liochlav. And here we're on Daf Samach Amud Beis. Elolav. Therefore, how do we interpret the Mishnah? So we said the following: if it's one avoda achas, then what are we going to say? If it's one avoda, is mixas ochlav lo pasul, and therefore what? When the Kohen HaShochet had in mind all the menuyim, it's a shchita kshera. So therefore, what's the chiddush of our Mishnah? Af osam haru'uyim levadam is tzarich lishchot shnei simanim. It came bevadai afim b'shchita levada chashav sheshochet bein liochel bein shelo liochel v'karban kosher uma ba ha-mishnah lelamda. Again, this is all on avoda achas. What does he say? Elalav v'avoda achas. Okay, Rabos, I think we're running out of time. This line in the Gemara is a little bit more complicated, so let's leave it for tomorrow, Mirz Hashem. How does the Gemara say Elo lav bavoda achas? That the korban is kosher when he had two different machshavos in one avoda like shchita, and l'chora he had in mind for ochlav and shaloli ochlav, that certainly should be kosher. All right, so Mirz Hashem will wrap this sugya up in Bli Neder tomorrow.